Welcome to our final day of the seminar. Sadly, it is the final day, but we have a great lineup of talks for the day today as well. So we'll get started right away with our fourth keynote address, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Juan Manuel Burgos, who teaches philosophy, personalistic anthropology in Madrid, and is the founder and director of the Spanish Association for Personalism, and the editor of their journal, Quien, which is a great venue for personalist studies. And he's written extensively on personalism. For those of us interested in sort of personalism as an ongoing and growing tradition, Juan's work is indispensable. I highly recommend his Introduction to Personalism and his Personalist Anthropology and many of his other books as well. I've benefited a great deal from them. So we'll get started right away, and he's going to be speaking to us on Karol Wojtyla, Pope John Paul II, on community.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here talking about Wojtyla on community, even in the von Hildebrand community, but it's like a personal community. Well, I will start. You will have, I apologize for my pronunciation because it's not very good. So to try to solve this, at least in some part, you will have the text that I am reading there, no? So that probably will help to understand the conference, the talk. Okay. So going straight to the points. Okay. I will divide my talk into 5 points. The primacy of the person, participation and alienation, the view of community of Karol Wojtyla, the common good as the core of community, and the fifth last point will be the attitudes towards the common good, or ways to beat or not the community. An interesting point talking about Wojtyla is when he talks about community and common good. He talks because he has thought about that, but also because he has lived in a totalitarian country, and he has fought against this totalitarian country. No? So his thought is a mixed result of his thinking, but also of his life. So this is interesting because it's not only theory, but it's the result of something that he lived and he fight on. No? So I'm going to the first point, the primacy of the person. To speak about community is to speak of the adequate relationship between person and society, of the way in which both must participate in the construction of a collective project, which requires a position on the relative weight of the person and society, and constructs him and society. Wojtyla participation, sorry, that's just another word. Wojtyla had a clear and determined answer for this question, the primacy of the person over society, and I think it's important to start emphasizing this point. This priority of the person over society is theoretically based on person and action, his opus magnum, in which the analysis of the person is carried out, mainly through an analysis of the individual person and their characteristics: self-determination, self-possession, transcendence, integration, self-realization. These are the key core points of the way of understanding Wojtyla person in person and act. Some thinkers didn't like this view at the time of the publication of this work, because for them, the person is constructed mainly through the relationship, which would mean that a consistent analysis of the person could only be established by analyzing the relationship with other people, a procedure that Wojtyla had not followed. But Wojtyla explicitly rejects this criticism while maintaining the validity of his analysis. A quote of Wojtyla, the authors continues to maintain the position that the basic knowledge of the subject itself, of the person through the action, opens a way to understand in-depth human intersubjectivity. Without categories like self-possession and self-mastery, we will never come to understand the person in his relationship with other people to the proper extent. That means that Wojtyla opposes what I call relationalism because he understands that the person is self-consistent, a suppositum who can and should be analyzed by himself. Furthermore, it is only through this analysis that it will be possible to proceed to the understanding of the interpersonal relationship, which is precisely a relationship between persons. It is not, of course, a one-way relationship that always goes from the person to the relationship. The interpersonal relationship also influences the person, but in a secondary way, because the primacy belongs to the subject. This is a very key point in Wojtyla, and I think this is worthwhile emphasizing it, because in personalism now there is a discussion over the weight of relationship in the way of building the person. No? But for Wojtyla, it is clear that there is a primacy of the person. So there is not a strict balance or equal weight in between person and relationship, but there is a primacy of the person, and this is a very important key to think about what a community is. No? So that's why I start with this point. No? So going to the second point, that is participation and alienation, that we are starting here with the way in way Wojtyla thought about community. This is so first the person, second point, the alienation and participation and alienation, that is the way to understand what Wojtyla named the IU scheme. Well, I would say that Wojtyla is a bit complicated. Here I am trying to simplify it, no? But Wojtyla is a complete guy, no? So that's a point to be clear, no? So we have the person. Now we are talking about the interpersonal relationship, and to understand that, Wojtyla uses two key concepts. The first one is participation. The second one is alienation. So participation, the key concept that Wojtyla uses to thematize the person-society relationship, or in his terminology, the way in which the person acts together with others, is participation, which is a peculiar type of interpersonal relationship in which the person jointly constructs himself and society. Wojtyla participation, in fact, does not occur in every relationship, but only in those in which the subject, by relating and carrying out a task together with others, grows as a person. A quote of Wojtyla: "What is characteristic of participation is that in acting together with others, man maintains the personal value of his own action, and at the same time performs what results from acting together." It can also be said, reversing the order, that thanks to participation, when man acts together with others, he preserves everything that results from the joint action, and at the same time, through this, he realizes the personalist value of the action. Well, this is one of the complex sentences of Wojtyla, but the idea is that, well, I think it will be clear at the end of the paragraph. No? It is easy to understand why Wojtyla makes this very important clarification. It is common to exalt interpersonal relationships, highlighting the importance of communities, mutual help, and coexistence with others. But real life is also full of situations in which these relationships are destructive. It is not, therefore, to highlight the centrality of interpersonal relationships in human existence in order to build a valid theory of social relationships. The content, quality, and value of these relationships must be specified to facilitate a more precise and accurate analysis. And precisely here is where we must frame the Wojtyla proposal as a special type of relationship in which the subjects constructs himself together with others, that is participation. There is participation then when and only when the task that is carried out together with others build the subject as a person. Only then there is participation. If it is not the case, people are doing things with others, but they are not participating. Participation, understood in this sense, as Wojtyla to complete his position, is not something that can simply happen or not happen. It is first a right that every person possesses. The right to act and put into play the personal value of the action. That is the right to build oneself as a person by acting together with others. So participation could be a fact, but is also a right. A right that society should not hinder or limit. For this reason, any limitation of these rights supposes an action against the person and their dignity. Correlatively, this right is accompanied by a duty to participate. That is the moral obligation on the part of the person to act in such a way that self-realization is achieved and the personalistic value of the act is maintained. Therefore, it should not be surprising that the duty of participation can be understood as a modulation of the commandment of love, as long as it keeps in mind that, quote of Wojtyla, what we define as the commandment of love is at its elemental basic level is an invitation to experience the human being as another self. That is an invitation to participate in that humanity concretized in his person as my humanity is concretized in my person. Well, I said the Wojtyla quotations are complicated. You can see that, even though these are. But I think I hope the ideas more or less are clear. No? So first point, participation as this idea of not only doing things with others, but doing things in a way that I build myself as a person. Only in this case, there is participation. And the opposite to participation is alienation. No? The antithesis of participation is alienation. The relationship that destroys man or despersonalizes him. When participation occurs, man is capable of building a collective project that at the same time self-realizes him, because both society and others consider him and treat him as a human being with absolute dignity. But this not always happen. Man can also activate destructive interpersonal relationships such as enmity and violence, hate, jealousy, and envy. Or even social structures such as those of totalitarian regimes where human beings are turned into things or objects to be immolated to obtain collective ends. While participation generates a personal and collective increase in humanity, alienation produces the strictly opposite effect. The awakening or even annulment of the possibility of experience another human as being as another self. So to experience the other person as self, as another self, is the key of the IU scheme of Wojtyla. Well, Wojtyla strongly emphasized, however, that human beings are always in a position to overcome a structurally alienating context. Individual people achieve it even in situations as extreme as concentration camps, as happens with Massimiliano Kolbe, and entire societies have also achieved it in different historical moments. But a structurally alienating social configuration turns participation into a heroic action, which is not desirable. Okay, third point, now we are going to, from the interpersonal relationship, we are going already to try to know what Wojtyla thinks about community. It's important to add here that the thinking of Wojtyla is not like the thinking of von Hildebrand. It is a very big and clear book called Metaphysics of Community. Wojtyla doesn't have this kind of book. So you have to read in his papers and try to synthesize all the ideas. No? And this is more or less what I have to try here. No? There are two main books in which Wojtyla talk about that. One is the 5th chapter of Personal Action, or the acting person, and the other one is an important article that he has that is called Person, Subject, and Community. In these two texts are where the main ideas of Wojtyla are of a community, has of a community. No? So 3 points: society, community, communio personarum. And first point will be a community system and neighbor system. Wojtyla's first proposal to structure the social world is found in Personal Action, where he distinguishes, first of all, two types of communities, those of existing and those of acting. The communities of existence are those in which the subject exists and inhabits without this existence depending to a large extent on their activity, since they somehow preceded and are already configured, as happens, for example, with the family and the nation. The people only encounter these societies, but they didn't create them. No? On the contrary, action communities derive from human action, jobs in which master and apprentice interact, or other types of professional configuration. But these communities, although distinct, are not completely independent. Any community of existence always conditions the community of action, and therefore we cannot think of the second without the first. However, he continues, the essence of the problem is that being a member of such communities is not the same thing as participating. This last part of the text is of decisive importance because it concerns what Wojtyla really cares about, the capacity of social systems to generate participation. And noting that in no one of the communities he had described participation is assured, he introduces a new type of social structure, which he calls the neighbor system, to solve this difficulty. Indeed, both the communities of existing and those of acting are powerful sources of identity for the subject. And so every person needs to belong to a town, club, tribe, nation, or social group, or to several of these communities simultaneously. But since Wojtyla is very aware of the value of belonging, he is also aware of the danger that can arise if it is overvalued. If the human being is only considered a person in the full sense when he is a member of a community. Or put another way, when the subject is only admitted to the community to the extent that he resembles the other members. This is a straight path toward alienation. What happens then with the difference with the stranger or foreigners, what we have everywhere here in the States and also in Spain, the problem of immigration, and this is a clear application of that question. Should they be excluded from the community and therefore from participation? To solve this difficulty, Wojtyla presents the neighbor system, an ideal type of social structure to which one belongs for the sole reason of being a man. This is somehow connected with when Maria talked yesterday about one of the deep types of community for Hildebrand that we related with the idea of humanity. And here appears the same idea in Wojtyla. For sharing the same humanity regardless of the specific characteristic that each human being possesses. The concept of neighbor refers to or considers only humanity itself, which any other man possesses as much as I do. The concept of neighbor, therefore, creates the broadest community, which extends beyond any diversity among others that are a consequence of belonging to diverse human communities. This does not imply, however, any rejection of communities, because for Wojtyla, both systems are necessary. The community generates belonging by introducing the subject into specific societies and contexts, some things that every person needs. For this reason, the mission of the neighbor system is not to oppose community system, but on the contrary, to sustain or purify it, facilitating participation in it, that is that the community does not consist only in a place where the similar can live, but a space in which the person can build himself as a person. That is the main idea of Wojtyla that he's repeating once a lot. No? And precisely for this reason, the neighbor system is the most basic, fundamental structure of society, or it has to be. Not communities in the sense understood by Wojtyla, but the neighbor system, the neighbor system. No? Why? Because since it is the only one that recognizes any human being as a neighbor and close simply by being a man. Well, second point in the classification of society of communities by Wojtyla, that would be the point B: community, society, and communio personarum. The original powerful distinction between the neighbor system and the community does not seem, however, to have satisfied Wojtyla completely, because he would later affirm that in personal action there is no theory of community. Wojtyla is very humble, so sometimes you don't have to take his words about his work sometimes too seriously, no? Because as you have seen, there is a theory of community, no? But he thinks that it has to be a very, very good and powerful theory of community, and this is not in personal action, but there are some very interesting ideas, no? The method, he will try to resolve in his second most important writing on social philosophy, person, subject, and community. The method that he's going to use, and he already used successfully in personal action, consists of trying to introduce subjectivity into theories in which it is not considered. Specifically, he will return again to the traditional distinction between community and society that we can find in Maritain and others personalists. No? But introducing now the subjective dimension in the community to enable the generation of a collective or group consciousness as presented in the we. So the point is that community is only a community when we can say we, so that we identify ourselves with this community. It's not like an external object thing, but a thing that we are trying to understand what is the entity of this thing, but independent of that, this entity is something that we can call we, because we understand that we are inside, in a way, inside this community. No? Society then arises in a classical way when certain group of people are united by an objective characteristic that is common to each and every one of them. But the community, this is the novelty, considers the subjectivity of individuals. Therefore, here we have a complex quote of Wojtyla: the community is not the society, and the society is not the community. Although for the purpose of one and the other, the same elements are largely determining factors. However, we conceive them as the different aspects, and this constitutes an important difference. Well, here there is a complex relationship between society and community that I am not going to go deep in there, because here is the main point about community related to the think of Wojtyla, about his mature thinking, that Wojtyla, however, does not seem to have been very satisfied with this characterization of the community either. Moreover, over time, he seems to have definitively abandoned the idea of defining the community due to its excessively generic nature, in favor of the expression communio personarum, a terminological creation of his with which he seeks to identify those social relationships that structurally enables participation. That is the idea. We have here discussing a lot about what is the essence of community. I think this is a very interesting conversation and discussion, but Wojtyla in a way thinks that it's too difficult to define all kinds of community in an only specific way. So in a way, he goes out and says, well, I'm going to do a different things, no? And so he invents this terminology of communio personarum, that is the kind of community where participation structurally happens, no? And so when in Man and Woman he created then, he tries to find a term that will allow him to adequately describe the male-female unit he affirms. The term community could also be used here if it were not generic and did not have such numerous meaning. Communio says more and with greater precision, since it indicates precisely that help that derives, in a certain sense, from the very fact of existing a person next to a person. The communio personarum, therefore, is his last and definitive choice to describe the human groups structurally configured in such a way that participation is possible. Well, let's go to the fourth point, that is the common good. What Wojtyla understands by common good, and what is the meaning or sense or purpose of common good in a community. And here is going once again to be key the idea of participation. Okay. The common good is a key element of community, but it faces a main problem: its problematic and contradictory structure. Since there seems to be a certain natural opposition between the social good and the personal good. For example, the expropriation of some land, for example, may be good for the community by allowing the construction of a highway. But it leaves the owner without this land that perhaps belonged to his ancestor or he has worked on for years. The growing number of traffic rules, at least in Spain, maybe also here, reduce the number of accidents, but increasingly limits and restricts the freedom of drivers, even in a minimal aspects. No? So here there is a problem. No? Individualism and collectivism will solve this problem by eliminating the balance between between the individual and society. As individualism gives primacy to the self-centered individual, the problem will be solved, so to say, giving priority to individuals and thus eliminating as much as possible the collective rules. And the opposite will happen in collectivism. As the common good is that which benefits society, great value should not be placed on the needs of interests of individuals. But it has happened in personalism, one wants to maintain the balance between the two terms of the relationship. How is this notable difficulty solved? A difficulty which Maritain called the paradox of social life. He spoke about that in a very interesting book that is called The Person and the Common Good, and here is where this problem is exposed. No? Wojtyla approaches his solution of this issue starting from the traditional scholastic vision that affirms that the common good is the end that is achieved through a common action that produces the good of all, the good for the community. That would be the classical view. Thus, the common good of our workers, those are examples of Wojtyla, who excavate, consists of carrying out the planned and commissioned excavation. That of a group of students who attend a class to learn a lesson, and so on. Wojtyla sees positive elements in this description, but at the same time, he points out that it is a quite summarized and superficial explanation. No, this is not a very kind comment, but sometimes it's not very common in Wojtyla, but here's what he thinks about that. No? The main problem that it presents is that it does not include the subjective dimension of the action. That is the key problem with this explanation. And when subjectivity is missing, anthropology and ethics suffer because they are working on a limited and poor idea of the person that extends to the concept that they produce. Wojtyla, on the contrary, considers that the common good cannot be defined without taking into account at the same time the subjective moment, that is, the moment of actions that refers to the agent person. So common good, well, I think it's clear, no? You cannot think of the common good as mere things, as the mere production of objects of any kind, without considering what happens to the people who produce them. Furthermore, based on the priority of the person over things, the common good must and thus depend mainly on people and what happens to them, not on the products of their action. This is the appropriate path sorry. This is the appropriate path to harmonize the authentic common good with participation, overcoming a purely instrumental vision of action with others. When this doesn't happen, when one is not able to capture the subjective dimension of the action, the common good is transformed into pure objectivity, into a mere something that can even become anti-personal, ceasing to be an authentic common good. If the construction of the excavation or the increase in production in a factory is carried out through the physical or economic exploitation of the workers, a common good has not been carried out, but rather, on the contrary, alienation has been generated. The two common goods, Wojtyla thinks, must be an authentic personal structure of the existence of man in community that makes it possible through participation to produce at the same time a good for the person and a good for the community. This is the way, brilliant in my view, in which Wojtyla solves the Maritanian social paradox, that is, the presumed or possible opposition between the common good and the personal good. When the person faces an authentic common good, this does not oppose his personal good. On the contrary, both overlap and enhance each other, because the person, by working for that common good, also works for themselves. In short, the common good includes the personal good. It is now, with these ideas, possible to face another classic dilemma that is a new twist on the same problem. Who has primacy in the realm of good, the common good or the individual good? Scholasticism has generally sustained the primacy of the common good over the individual, based on the action that the good of the whole is greater than the good of the parts. But this statement, if not properly dealt with, could lead to a probably unwanted but real and effective collectivism. The good of the person should be submitted to the social whole, because the whole is greater than the person. This difficulty can be solved in two ways. In the first place, noting that this logical affirmation is not valid for persons, as all the personalists have maintained, because the human being, unlike animals, is not below the species, but about it, since he has an absolute value. So that will be the first thing. But in addition, in the terms in which Wojtyla poses the question, this dispute or opposition dissolves intrinsically, since the common good must necessarily include the personal good. Since the common good is only valid when it is also the good of the person, otherwise it's not common good. We can find a confirmation of the validity of this interpretation in its ability to solve some of the aporias that derive from the social paradox, such as the justification of sacrifice and especially of extreme sacrifices. To what extent should man sacrifice himself for the community? The person, answers Wojtyla, can and should be willing to make sacrifices for the common good, even extreme ones, as long as this sacrifice is not understood in organic terms, such as the part that has to be sacrificed for the whole, or where the person seeks what is fair from them alone. No? or the individual that has to sacrifice himself for the species. And for this reason, the person cannot and should not renounce to his dignity for the community. Now he continues this danger lacks in the theological conception if participation is not taken into account. In this conception, in fact, the common good can end up becoming a purely numerical and quantitative issue. So, and then the lesser must give way to the greater. No? But in the way of Wojtyla, if the common good includes the personal good, that's not happen. In fact, you can even give your life for the community, but if you do that without losing your dignity, that giving your life for the community will create a common good in which your own personal good is included. No? In this case, there are a very good film that you not have seen. I recommend you to see. That is A Hidden Life for who's the Terrence Malick has done a very good film over the idea of an Austrian peasant that was asked to make a statement of loyalty to Hitler, a personal statement of loyalty to Hitler. But he refuses it, not because he didn't want to enlist in the army, but because he thought that it was not good for his dignity as a person to make a personal statement of loyalty to Hitler. So he refused to do that, and at the end he was executed. No, so at the end, and in this case, even though it seems contradictory and problematic, all the personal good and the common good were enhanced. Why? Because he gave up his life, but he went on with his dignity as a person. So he was loyal to his conscience, and for them that is very important. Otherwise, he has been destroyed as a man. And he was also good for the community because he makes he did an appeal and he made clear that these things were wrong. So this kind of loyalty to Hitler was a wrong thing. In fact, I don't know, now he's starting the process of beatification because he was a Catholic, and the history is very well narrated by Terrence Malick, but in a long film because all the films of Malick are very long and sometimes complex. This is always the case, but the film is really, really wonderful, and this is a beauty film. We were talking about beauty last night, and this is a very, very beautiful film. No? Well, I'm going to the 5 point because time is passing. So this is a more easy one, and I think very interesting. And the name is the attitudes towards the common good or ways to build or not community. So finally, we'll consider the different possible attitudes toward the common good and their repercussions. Wojtyla offers an interesting analysis of 5 aptitudes divided into 2 groups. Authentic attitude, that there are solidarity, opposition, and dialogue, and inauthentic, conformism and evasion. This is interesting because even though the other things are more theoretical, this is very practical, and it's clear that it's based on the experience of Wojtyla in his fights against the communist regime in Poland, and seeing the ways that how the different people behave. No? So we start with the authentic attitude that are solidarity, opposition, and dialogue. Solidarity, in the first place, is defined as the constant willingness to accept and carry out the part that corresponds to each person, to his belonging to a certain community. This is the definition of Wojtyla. A definition that is completed by indicating that it is not supportive to assume the burdens and responsibility of others, because each one must be responsible for the part that corresponds to them, since only if they do so will they grow as a person. In other words, you should not collaborate with someone who irresponsibly exempts himself from his duties. And solidarity can lead to the non-invasion of the obligation of others. I think this is a very interesting point. So that each one fulfills the part that corresponds to him in the construction of the common good. There may be times, however, when the correct attitude is the opposite, when someone, for valid reasons, cannot perform his obligations. Therefore, solidarity must include a certain predisposition to carry out extraordinary tasks, a behavior in any case that should only be activated when this help is truly essential. Solidarity, in short, does not consist in supplying the work that others must and can carry out, but rather in collaborating with these tasks for justified reasons. Okay. Well, the second attitude is opposition. Opposition for Wojtyla, that could be maybe surprising, but I think it's also a very interesting and practical analysis, is also an authentic attitude. Furthermore, it is an important way of participation, as long as it is conceived as constructive and not as a closed or sectarian obstruction to any opinion or position different from one's own. Those who oppose constructively do so with the intention of achieving not only their own good, but also that of the community. In first point, determining the common good is in many cases not a simple and easy task. We cannot think that to know what common good is an easy thing. At the contrary, it's a very difficult thing, no? Furthermore, not everyone always seeks the authentic common good. Therefore, opposing opinions or decisions that are considered to harm the common good is not only an acceptable and justified attitude, since it can allow the cancellation of erroneous decisions or the improvement of inaccurate choices, but it is also valuable and even praiseworthy. Opposition, in fact, will probably involve difficulties, setbacks, and the abandonment of the comfort zone, since whoever opposes does not go unnoticed. So if one opposes, he is seen, and this probably will produce problems of several kinds, no? Well, the third attitude that Wojtyla considers is dialogue and discussion, which are understood in a more combative or intense way than one might expect. Dialogue, debate, and discussion are the natural path of the human existence, thinks Wojtyla, and are found anywhere, from discussion between parents about the education of their children to debates between statesmen or politicians about the measures to be adopted for the nation. And since each person or group can be deeply convinced of their ideas, the sharing of opinions and the process that leads to decision-making will often be marked by divergences and logical and reasonable confrontations. These debates, Wojtyla believes, do not cancel participation, but rather create it, because the ideal of participation is not an utopian pacifism be free of tension or debate, since such pacifism may not be positive for society. On the other hand, both individuals and groups, even well-intentioned ones and with strong moral principles, can have very different visions of what should be done at a given moment. Not every Christian, not all Christians, for example, think in the same way. We can have very different opinions about important moral topics. And furthermore, negative ethical attitudes cannot be naively dispensed with. People do not always want the good or seek it, but rather the satisfaction of their interests. This is the real framework in which the dialogue must take place. For this reason, Wojtyla is committed to dealing with problems frankly and in depth, without hiding the difficulties under fictitious agreement in operative proclamations of empty words that hide ethically unjustifiable decisions of abstentions. That's why, this is a quote from Wojtyla, the principle of dialogue is so appropriate, because by not shying away from the tensions, conflicts of struggles that appear in the life of the different human communities, and assuming what it is true and just in then, it can be the origin of good for man. Well, that will be the last point, will be B, inauthentic attitudes, conformism and evasion. Regarding inauthentic attitudes, Wojtyla focuses on two, conformism and evasion. Conformism consists of a passive attitude towards events, which occurs when the subject renounces self-determination and self-realization but acting together with others, and adapts without any resistance to what the majority establishes. Wojtyla analyzes in great depth this position, indicating first that through conformism, the man person somehow consents to be taken away from himself by community. He, in fact, does not make his own decisions, but the community takes them for him. In this way, he renounced one of the essential traits of the person, his capacity for self-determination, the ability to freely determine his own path and destiny. And in doing so, he has the opposite effects. He removes himself from community. Conformism is the denial of participation. True participation is replaced by an apparent participation, by a superficial adaptation to others without conviction and without authentic implication. By renouncing his capacity for self-determination, the conformist renounces participation in the community, since he is not willing to contribute his personal position due to the risk of discomforts that may come with it, confrontations, accusations, and so on. For this reason, he opts for camouflage and a purely external adaptation to the community, with the sole objective of obtaining benefits or avoiding unpleasant situations, without at any time become involved in the effective construction of the common good, through solidarity or opposition. In short, the conformist breaks the line of participation since he renounces building himself as a person, and in doing so, eliminates the contribution he can make to the community. Wojtyla concludes his analysis of attitudes towards the common good with a nuanced assessment of evasion, which he considers somehow more authentic than conformist, unless in some contexts. Evasion consists of a renunciation of community and participation. The subject decides to limit his presence in the community as much as possible, focusing on his own life or that of some restricted groups, such as family or closest acquaintances. It seems clear that evasion should be considered inauthentic and harmful, since it eliminates participation, key to the common good and community building. But Wojtyla qualifies this assessment by making it depends on the reason why the subject adopts this attitude. So, by going to close the conference, Wojtyla considers evasion and conformism inauthentic, but he seems that in certain situations, in certain times, can be justified, as is the case of a totalitarian society. In a totalitarian society, the person can think that he cannot create nothing in the community, and he cannot oppose it, and he cannot apport anything that is personal. So, in this case, his solution will be to evade to say, I cannot do nothing here, so I evade from the community. No? In this case, that Wojtyla says that in this specific case, evasion and conformism will be justified, but this is a condemnation in the case of the community, because community, in this case, impedes participation that is a key to the person. Well, that's all. Thanks for the... apologize for listening to me during all this time.
Thanks for that wonderful talk. And there's a number of hands already up, so raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you. We have lots of time for questions. We'll go with John first.
Thank you, Juan Manuel, for that lecture. My question goes right back to the beginning on the primacy of the person. And that seems to mean the primacy of self-possession and self-determination. And what I'm wondering is whether the relationship to the other begins to look too accidental if the primary thing about persons is their self-possession and self-determination. I'm thinking of the formulation that, for instance, Norris Clark, the Jesuit personalist, used. He said, the relation to other persons and the relation of me to myself and my self-possession are equally primordial. And I'm wondering if that equal primordiality of self-possession and self-gift. In fact, I kept waiting, maybe I missed it. I kept waiting for some mention of self-gift. And that passage in Wojtyla where he says, man is the only being who exists for his own sake and who can only find himself by making a sincere gift of himself. So that gesture of self-gift toward the other would seem for Wojtyla to be just as fundamental as the self-possession. And therefore I'm wondering if the talk of the primacy of self-possession is...
Well, thanks for the question. It's a complicated issue. In personality, there is a debate on that specific point. And I think we need, probably we need, in my way, to solve this problem, we will need a more accurate analysis of what relation is. No, because I think we are thinking in a relation in a very deep and broad way, so this is difficult to solve the problem. No? But in my opinion, it's clear that Wojtyla, in fact, this is a critique that people made to person and action. Person and action is mainly an analysis of the individual person. So that's why he was criticized. But that's why also I refer to this quote of Wojtyla answering to this criticism that was not now, but when he published Person and Action in the 60s, and he said, well, I understand what he says specific that I understand what you are saying. I realize the problem, but even though I go on with the idea that the person in itself has a primacy over the relationship. This is always my position. So I think that relationships are very important, but it's difficult to say that because it's not really like that. But it will say that we are persons before or prior to our relationship, in the sense that we die by ourselves, we die alone. We pay the taxes also, not the community pay the taxes, we pay the taxes, and they can have a very, very strong relationship, but if one of the persons dies, the other go on living, no? So I understand that this is not the typical answer, that people would like that more emphasis would be put in the relationship, but I think this is real for me. So I have my own identity. It is my identity. It's not an interpersonal, interrelational identity. It's my identity. It is real that I build my identity with all the relationships. I am here, and all the relationships that I am making here are building myself, but I am not my relations. This is my opinion, and I think that is the opinion of Wojtyla too, which doesn't mean that the relationship with others is very, very important, but it's very important for a person that is already constituted. That would be my... I know that probably you don't agree with that, but this is my answer to the question.
Thank you for your presentation. I had a question. So at one point, you made the claim that you were talking about the primacy of the common good and the formulation that Wojtyla initially said, and then you said that this actually wouldn't be valid for personalists because the person is above the species, not below it. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about what you mean by that, because at least in a logical sense, we are below our species. Like, we are instantiations of human nature. And it's not remarkably clear to me how one can say that. But from like a metaphysical ethical perspective, I could see some sort of claim that, like, as you were just saying, there's claims that a community may not make of a person. So I was just wondering if you could clarify that. I wasn't entirely sure what you meant when you said that.
Okay, thanks. It's an interesting question, but this is clear in all the personalists, not only in Wojtyla, that because the person has an absolute value. This is the main point that clarifies this. So, as every person is a who, is a irreplaceable person, so he has dignity, he has an absolute value. Also, even in the Kantian terms, you cannot be an instrument for any other things. So that means that you cannot be an instrument for the others. So, for example, we can make an example. If there is a superpopulation of elephants in a national park or in a reserve, you can say, well, there is no other way of solving this problem that by eliminating, 100 elephants. So you can do that, okay, because these elephants are not, they have no dignity in the human sense. So you can do that to preserve the species. But in the case of humans, we couldn't do that. We said we are like too many. In New York, there are too many people. No, so let's go to kill 1,000 so that to solve the traffic problem. No, I'm joking a bit, no, but that would be the idea. So in these cases, as the person has an absolute value, the person never can be an instrument, a mere instrument for solve the problem. So if the person can give his life voluntarily for his country, but this is another thing. I don't know if this clarifies a bit the idea.
All right, I'll be quick, but I have a follow-up then. So I wonder what you think then about, so when Jacques Maritain and Charles de Connick had something of a debate about this. One of the points that de Connick brought up is that when he speaks about the primacy of the common good, he's not saying that the community is great and the persons are like lame and very low. But the point is that we generally receive much of our good, many of our moral responsibilities through the community, and we are actually elevated through our communication with other persons. And so what we would get is not this idea that we can get rid of human beings if it's good for the community, but that frequently our responsibilities and our fulfillment is found in the demands that our community has made for us, as in parenthood or something like that. So, yeah.
No, I know this discussion between Maritain and de Connick, because in fact I did my PhD is on Maritain. I can say that also this article is an adaptation of the article, the paper that you have in the brochure, that is Wojtyla on Common Good. But the problem here is that in general in scholastics, the Connick is an scholastic, for them the common good is too objective. That's the problem. So when they think generally, when they think of the common good, they think of the common good mainly like a thing. There is no subjectivity there. Also, that's the problem, that's the idea who generates the problem. That's why Wojtyla says that you have to introduce subjectivity in the common good. Because if you don't introduce subjectivity in the common good, you are thinking of, in a way, of a inhuman society who does not take care for what happens to the individual persons. That would be the idea, no? So more or less the explanation. Okay.
So, thank you for your talk. You talked about solidarity and supplying the work towards the common good. So it seems that if there's this demand of us to work for the common good, there's some sort of moral obligation to the common good. how do we know that we have in fact fulfilled that moral obligation to the common good?
Well, we have a moral obligation to the common good because, in this sense, maybe I didn't mention that, but the person, when I talk about the primacy of the person because I want to emphasize this point, but also the person grows himself, giving himself to others. So it is clear that, for me at least, I have my own identity that is not a relational identity in his more deep senses, but is my identity. But to grow as a person, the only grow to as a person, as a human person, in a deep way, is to give himself to the others. So that's the moral. That's was the point where moral obligation to collaborate with the human, with the common good starts. No? Because otherwise, to talk about self-possession and self-determination sometimes looks like a bit egocentric, so to say. I'm thinking of me, but I don't think it is the case, no? Because even in the gospel, say, love to the others as you love to yourself, no? I think the love of ourselves, in fact, is the motor of the idea we can help the others. When you don't love yourself, it's very difficult to help the others, no? But in this case, the moral obligations starts because we have the moral obligation to help the others, and in the interpersonal relationship, and also in the community, no? I don't think that would be more or less my answer.
I wanted to follow up on the position of the person over and against the community, specifically as it relates to marriage. In the Reformed tradition, we talk about a covenant marriage, that the relationship actually supersedes the desires of the individual. Not that those are bad or they're completely negated, but that the relationship takes precedence. And I wonder how that would fit into what you said earlier about the person being more important than the relations or the community, specifically in the context of marriage.
Well, yeah, it's a good question, probably a difficult question too. I say that in this case, one point is that this is a free decision. So that's so you create a special relationship, but you create it by your free decision. So you create something with the other person, okay? And in this case, you, in a way, maybe you are obliged by yourself because you say, I am going to do that. No? So in the sense, you with the other person creates a thing, no? But if we say, for example, say, if there are some obligations and duties and things in marriage, but let's think that the other part of the marriage asks you to say something wrong, to do something wrong. So that would be, you have to do it because you are part of the marriage. So that would be more or less the argument. In this case, it's not a common good in the usual sense because it's only an interpersonal relationship. It could be a common good if we talk about family, not marriage, because marriage is only one interpersonal relationship. But that would be the point. Even you are in a marriage, you are committed to the marriage. If the other person asks you to do something wrong, you don't have to do it. That would
be. I want to go back to Dr. Crosby's observation. And I'm still struggling with this formulation, maybe thinking in terms of what philosophers coin as psychological egoism versus ethical egoism. That it seems to me what you're saying is that we ought to pursue the common good ultimately because it's for our good. And if that's the case, I'm not sure that's the best way to construe the fullness of the human person. I could argue that we ought to seek the common good. Inadvertently, when that happens, rightly motivated and so forth, it does serve me, but that's not why I'm doing it. And the way it feels like the way you construed this is that the only justification ultimately is that it honors or secures my own good.
Well, I understand the problem. I said that I think that this kind of explanation needs more analysis, probably a more developed way of explaining it. But I am not saying exactly so. No, what I am saying is that when you are always looking for your own good, even when you are looking for the good of others, more precisely is what I am saying. So even when you look for the good of others, that is a very good thing, and we have to do it. You are at the same time looking for your own good, because you cannot do anything that goes against yourself, because that would be a bad thing. So that's more precisely my idea, no? So that you have to look always for your own good, because you are mainly responsible for yourself. We are responsible also for the others, but we are mainly responsible for ourselves, no? So that we can say things, I have to do that, and in a way I say, I am not thinking on me, I am thinking on the others. But in some indirect way, you are thinking on you, because you know that even when you give yourself to the others, that's good for you. So that would be the idea. So is it not that only I am thinking in me, but even in these cases, I am thinking on me. More it's a difficult topic.
Thank you very much for your talk. So my question actually, I think, follows up on Professor Crosby's question about the primacy of the person. And you brought up man and woman, he created them. When you, if I remember correctly, when you were talking about how a person arises in relation to another. But in that same work, the idea of original solitude is proposed and developed. And I'm wondering how original solitude might relate to the primacy of the person. If you have comments on that.
Well, I think it's very clear, because here, do you have first the person? So, in fact, this is a clear, direct answer to that. You have first, you have the person that is in an original solitude, so he needs the others, but he exists in this original solitude without the others. This is a bad situation, so that you have to establish relation with the others, so that you can fulfill yourself and help to the others, not only thinking in you, as he says, no. But at the beginning, the person is in the original solitude because his identity is a personal identity, is not a relational identity. Well, I think that would be my answer, no? So the person fulfills, but because he's Adam, I don't know how Adam and Eve, they are different persons. They are related, but they are not the same.
Yeah, and I actually think one of the reasons why I wanted to go to that work of his is because his account is really reading the twofold account in Genesis.
Yeah.
And so some of the complexity of man in solitude, man in communion of persons, but then that also introduces sex and gender. That's why I kind of wanted you to reflect further there, because I think it's interesting.
Well, the two tales are different, because in the first tale is like, or the first one is not, it's about, like the second is about man and women, and the first one is about human being. That more or less the explanation that Wojtyla says, no, in the theology of the body. So the first tale is the gospel. Well, the Bible refers to the human being in general. A human being in general has, in this way, we will say that he has his own identity as a human being, but as the human being needs to be relational. This is an identity that is not complete, is not fulfilled. They need the others, no? And the second tale is not only about human being, it's about what is the first relationship. The first relationship is the relation between man and woman. So the way of fulfilling or solving this original solitude is to start relating with men with woman and woman with men. No? So that with the but this idea of the two tails is interesting because in a way it's a way of solving, without solving, so to say, this problem of the primacy or not primacy of the person. Because in a way there is a primacy of the person. And this primacy of the person, in my way, is reflects in the first tail. Because here you have only the human person with his dignity and his image of God. But this is not sufficient, and you have the second tail, which is the relationship. Okay? The problem is that there is not one only tail, there are two, so it's difficult to establish what is but I think I really think that we have to start by the primacy of the person, because otherwise there is no interpersonal relationship. You need a person to establish a personal interrelationship.
Just really quick, I just remembered too, though, like with the second creation account, if I remember correctly, what's important is subjectivity and how subjectivity is introduced in relationship, whereas in the first, it's more of an objective, man and women are created at once.
Yeah, this is true too, no? Because Wojtyla is always complex and there are a lot of things in his thinking. Okay.
I want to return to this question of whether self-concern and concern for others are always sort of on a parallel level, or whether there's a darker kind of self-concern. And I'm always looking for evidence in popular culture, given that a stopped clock is right twice a day. There's a song entitled, "Life Was Easier When I Only Cared About Me." And the author is not saying that's the ideal. He's saying that's what he was saved from. He was living a partying kind of lifestyle. And he says, "I was spinning around in an ocean of grief. Your ladder came down to the sea. I was strapped to a rocket aimed right at the ground." So it's self-destructive. And then, either through meeting someone he loved, or maybe even meeting Christ, although I don't know if that's what the author had in mind, he said, "You caught me by surprise. You changed my destination. I had no reason to breathe until you knocked the wind out of me. Until I had no light that I could see until your radiance blinded me." And then he admits that's painful. It's painful to be raised out of sloth and selfishness. But he says, "I hope the pain never ends." Isn't that a more radical difference?
Well, I agree with that, but I am talking about that from an ontological point of view, not from an ethical point of view. So that's the point, is that, that will be the point. I am not saying that be alone with yourself is better for life. So I am not saying that, or be always thinking in you is the good way of thinking, because this is a bit clear that this is not the good way. What I was saying is that from an ontological point of view, from my point of view, there is a primacy of the person he decides about himself. This person can decide to be alone with himself or to give himself to the others. But it's he who is deciding that. That's the point. It's not the community, it's not the group of parents who is doing that. He is doing that. Even in marriage, it was the question before. In marriage, you build a community, but at the end, everyone is responsible for himself in this community. So, because the wife can do bad things or not, or at the contrary, at the end, you are responsible for yourself mainly. So that's because you decide only for yourself. Other people decide for themselves. So every one of us have his own responsibility. But this doesn't mean that I'm delightful with being close in my room, thinking only about me. This is a very different question. Okay.
Well, I know there are many other hands up, but unfortunately, we're at the end of our time here, so let's thank our speaker.